That is right. We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to another edition of your show and my show and Mesa's show and all of our shows. It's Orange Blue Today, presented by Sean Payton. And Mesa, I was super giddy when I got the email today from the Broncos saying that we could actually go out there on Saturday. So I was like, wait a second, what? I haven't seen one of these in a while. So that kind of got my day off to a good start, Mace. I was like, okay, good. Saturday, I'll be back at Broncos. We'll actually be able to put our eyes on part of this team anyway.
Wish we'd know about before because the indication was that wasn't going to be open. I'm glad it's open, but I'm not going to be able to be out there because unfortunately I can't change plans on that short a notice to be there. So I'm a little part of me. I'm excited that they're opening up. I'm a little bummed that they changed things a bit, and I can't change my plans fast enough. But that's me being selfish. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a surprise because the indication I'd gotten was that it was that wasn't going to be open in any form or fashion. So maybe getting beyond the bare minimum a little bit here.
Well, you and I talked about like, okay, when's the next time they're going to be open? And that was like, all right, see you in June, or at least a little bit later in this month of May. But it is going to be open at least for a little bit. So, and even open the locker room, which again, it's like, okay, maybe we get a little bit more than the bare minimum. I'm more than okay with that, Mace.
Well, the thing with the locker room is you can open it on that day because it's a rookie camp, and so you're only going to have a few dozen players in there. Like usually what prevents the locker room from being opened here, unlike some other places, like some other precincts in there around the NFL, when they have an open practice during OTAs, they open the locker room. Doesn't happen in Denver because the locker room is small. Something that was brought up in the NFL PA survey, but for our purposes is why there's never been open locker room during training camp, and there's never been open locker room during OTAs. Another reason why they need to focus, I think, on no matter what they do, renovation wise, rebuilding wise, at Dove Valley, on a bigger locker room. I think that's a priority, even though for us in the media, it's probably the lowest priority. But when you only have 30 some players instead of 90 players, that's why you can go into the locker room on that day. So that'll be a nice little change for everybody who's going to be out there.
Nice little change, nice little bonus for everyone. And of course, we'll be breaking it down for you as we often do on Orange and Blue Today, again, presented by Sean Payton. We talked about Surtain being on NFL Network on Good Morning Football and defending Russell Wilson. I wrote about it at denversports.com. And it's one of those things, Mace, it's like, okay, Pat Surtain's like the nicest guy ever. Of course he's going to defend Russell Wilson. And then for me personally, he got asked the Pat Mahomes question again. And if there's ever a motivation to actually beat Pat Mahomes, it's so that you don't get asked that question, like, are you guys ever going to beat him? But I thought Surtain handled himself, whether it's the Wilson question or Mahomes, like, of course Pat Surtain does a good job in front of the media.
I mean, you're going to get asked the question until you change it. That's the thing. And
yeah,
when you're the son of an NFL player, I think you've got a greater understanding of that than maybe some others do. He gets it. He knows that's not going to vanish until you do something about it. And I think Sean Payton as well, as you get toward Chiefs weeks, whatever those weeks are this year, he's going to understand that, all right, if you want the questions to stop, you actually got to beat him for a change. One of the many, many, many failures of Nathaniel Hackett, coach, I think, was having some inability to accept everything that was coming at him. I think he wanted it to just be another game. And, he's like, well, all that happened before we got there. Well, yeah, but it's your thing now.
You're here now.
You're here now. When you signed up to be the head coach of this team, that means you inherited a lot of things that exist and will be issues until they are remedied. Sean Payton, I think, has a greater understanding and acceptance of that than Nathaniel Hackett did, and I don't think you're going to see anything like that from Payton. But yeah, Surtain gets it. the questions are going to be there. They're not going to stop until you actually do something about them. And that's fair. I thought he handled that fine. No big thing.
Yeah, no big thing for Pat Surtain up there defending Russell Wilson. And they really tried to. And listen, we all have a job to do. And I generally think the Good Morning Football crew's done a really, really good job making that show entertaining. How many times has NFL Network tried different things in that time slot? And finally, Good Morning Football. I give a lot of credit to dear friend Kay Adams when she was on the show. That show became really, really good and entertaining, got some good people on it. But man alive, did they hound him about Russ. I get it. It's quarterbacks. They move the needle. But, man, it just, let it go. Russ is going to be Russ, man. He's going to do his high knees, and that's who he's going to be.
Well, they're searching for that moment that's going to go viral, right? When they're asking questions, you're trying to, peel the onion back a little bit, and you're trying to find out something that may be surprising and may move the needle and may make people say, oh, well, I don't think Pat Surtain offered anything like that. Again, even though he's only a third-year player, he's a pro. He's been around this sort of environment with his dad, and then he goes to the University of Alabama. He's been around this sort of thing for many years. He gets it. And so maybe there are some others who might have taken the bait. Surtain just wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, Surtain's not going to do that whatsoever. It is Orange and Blue today, presented by Sean Payton. And as we talk rookie roundup, well, one of your latest pieces at denversports.com was about the trade for Riley Moss. You and I have briefly mentioned the Moss versus Mathis thing, which I don't necessarily think turns out in terms of Damari Mathis is going to be your starter. But Riley Moss is here. So let's get into the trade. Let's get into your latest at denversports.com, Mason. Why that was such a highly coveted player, the Broncos would give up future draft capital to get him.
Yeah, in fact, if it works out to be a mid-range third-round pick that goes back to the Seahawks next year, effectively the cost that the Broncos would have given up in terms of draft capital to get Riley Moss is right there, late second, early third round pick, right there in the Marvin Mims, Drew Sanders range. So basically, even though he's the 83rd pick, in terms of what the Broncos surrendered, it's comparable value. And so then the question becomes, how do you get comparable results to what you would expect for somebody for somebody in that range? And I think first things first, you've got to find the right role for him. One of the reasons why he was intriguing, but why maybe other teams didn't have as high a priority on him, is because you're going to, at least right away, have to adjust some things to squeeze him into your lineup, because they're going to train him at cornerback, but he can also be a slot. He can also play some safety. He's going to be a little bit of a chess piece. And right now, getting him in there probably means maybe doing some things schematically. Maybe you go a little more dime and have him as the dime back to get him on the field. Where he ends up long term, frankly, that depends on how he does. And that's another thing with Riley Moss. It's not like you sit there and say, okay, he's going to be your boundary corner. Okay, he's going to be your slot corner. Oh, maybe we'll convert him to safety. I think with Riley Moss this year may be a little bit of trial and error in figuring out what the right role is for him. And I think it's to the credit of the Broncos that they're willing to go down this path with somebody who's got some fairly freakish athletic talent and also has exceptional ball skills. Not every team be willing to do that.
Yeah, and I like the fact that they can do that with time. You know, a lot of the times when you're kind of trying to figure out something with a player, it's usually a player that has to play. Like Riley Moss, you get him, you figure it out with Riley Moss, it's a benefit for your team. But by no means are you rushing him out there or putting him in a bad position to develop bad habits. Like, you have the time and the depth to go ahead and have him as your fourth corner and then see how far he can move up and how much he can handle as a rookie.
Yeah, you have that now. Now, if there's an injury to K'Wan Williams, Damari Mathis, or Pat Surtain, you're going to lose the benefit of that time. But that's just part and parcel of overall roster building, you did need another corner, period, in there. You'd signed Traymon Smith. He can be your cornerback 4 if the need arises. He's going to have a fairly extensive special teams role, but you needed somebody else in there to where you felt good about the depth. How many times over the last few years have the Broncos been caught short depth-wise at cornerback in particular, if we're including the slot in there, even last year, because you lost both Ronald Darby and K'Wan Williams was out for a spell. You were compromised there for a moment. You were compromised there at slot corner, and then you move on from Ronald Darby. You needed to kind of bolster that a little bit. That's a reason why, even though there weren't any screaming needs going into the draft that you could immediately address with any of the draft picks, there were some needs below the surface, and one of them was you needed another solid player in that cornerback room. Of course, that being said, you had that need because another third-round pick from Iowa, Michael Ojemudia, didn't work out as you hoped, and you cut him last season. So, again, kind of comes back to some of the issues of drafting over the last few years and having to start the cycle over again because players missed. And that was a theme of this draft, from Marvin Mims' speed vertical threat because KJ Hamler didn't work out, to Drew Sanders, who's an inside linebacker, but you can put him on the edge and he can be a pass rush threat because Nick Bonito had an underwhelming rookie season, onto Riley Moss, who was necessary to upgrade the depth at corner because Ojemudia didn't work out. So this is part of the pattern in which the Broncos still find themselves, trying to recover from picks of value that have missed.
This draft was brought to you by the letter V for versatility. And, well, what would you say by the letter F for like fix it? Fixing failures of the past?
Well, I was going to say the first F was failure, as in failure of previous picks. I mean, I'm not saying that flat out you should give a draft pick a grade of an F, especially KJ Hamler, because his struggles have been injury related. I never say someone who has injury issues is a bust in the draft process, but that pick did not end up working out as you'd hoped. And then certainly Nick Bonito, second round pick last year, hoped he'd be farther along than this, because even if Drew Sanders does factor more as an inside linebacker than on the edge, there doesn't seem to be a lot of buzz right now about Nick Bonito pushing to start at edge in that room with Randy Gregory and Baron Browning, Jacob Martin, Jonathan Cooper. Bonito doesn't seem to have a lot of traction right now. And if Sanders flashes and they say, we got to get this guy on the field for some snaps, he's going to probably take them from somebody on the edge rather than taking them from Alex Singleton and Josie Jewell, which is one of the areas on defense where you actually feel pretty strongly about the two guys that are starting.
Yeah, they drafted an inside linebacker when they finally have two solid starters in Jewell and Singleton, but either way, they got it done. Mason, correct me if I'm wrong, but at rookie minicamp or whatever they're calling it on Saturday, Christopher Allen will be able to participate. And that's another player. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not a rookie, but it's a player in our conversation here that's like, okay. And I remember, what was it, Greg Orton? Greg Orton seemed like he was in the league for like 8 years, and he was still at rookie minicamp because he never had the accrued seasons or whatever. But it's like, okay, but Christopher Allen, just from last year, now is another player we could get a glimpse of this weekend.
Right, because if you've been on the practice squad and that's all you were, or you were on injured reserve last year like Chris Allen, and you didn't get on the field, then you're eligible for that to take part in this weekend's activity. So presumably we'll see Allen. Allen is interesting because effectively, by signing Thomas Incoom as one of their undrafted rookies, they brought in somebody at the same position with some commonality skill set wise as Chris Allen. There may only be room for one of those two on the 53-player roster when all is said and done, unless they push out a veteran or two. And that is possible. there aren't any sacred cows on this roster, and we're going to see as the offseason and training camp develop, we're going to see some names that people know that fall out of favor with this new regime.
Yeah, I almost feel in a way the Denver Broncos are like the Seattle Seahawks, where it's like, okay, no matter where you are, if you're on the team and you're good, the cream's going to rise to the top. Like they don't care about your draft status, they don't care about what regime thought of it. Like if you're going to play, if you're going to compete, if you're going to win, you will rise and you will play.
They're gonna be players that are cut, traded in August that are going to, if you name them today, they would surprise people. And I'm not going to sit here and say we know who those players are because we don't. Okay. I'm not even sure that Sean Payton and his coaching staff yet who know who they are. I think they're going to find out over the coming weeks and months who those players are that fit, who doesn't, who's in, who's out. You go back to Vance Joseph's first year in 2017. If we had been doing this show in May of 2017, could we have forecast TJ Ward not being on the roster that year? No, but it happened. I'm not saying it's going to be somebody who is quite at that level, but we're going to see some players that at this moment appear to have pretty solid places on the roster, but end up moving on. Now, Jose says, I hope they flip some depth players for day 3 picks instead of cutting them. Well, here's the problem with that. You'd like to do that if at all possible. You'd like to make more deals like the Trinity Benson deal, like the Malik Reed deal, players that aren't in your plans, but you get some value back for them. But the only problem is sometimes as you're getting close, as you're going through August and teams start to realize that certain players are on the outs, there are some teams that may say, well, we're not going to give up a draft pick or some capital to get this player. We're simply going to wait until cut down date happens, and then we'll make a claim off waivers if it's a sub 4-year veteran, or if it's a veteran beyond that. Just try to get the player when they're released and kind of take your chances on the market. So that, it sounds good, Jose, to say all these players we can trade, but it never works that way in reality. It ends up being something where, you just have to kind of take your chances and then accept that maybe you're going to have somebody that had high value a while ago that maybe has no value, and you're sitting there cutting them on deadline day.
What was the Will Ferrell movie where he was the youth soccer coach? Remember that movie?
Screaming.
Kicking and Screaming.
Kicking
okay.
And screaming.
Didn't he have like a blue Zubaz shirt on?
Maybe, I don't remember.
But you're not wearing Zubaz today. You're wearing something.
No, but it's a similar kind.
Somewhat similar, yeah.
It's kind of a similar pattern to it, I guess. It's not Zubaz, it's something else. It's very comfortable. I like it. I don't think it's my wife's favorite thing that I wear because it's very dated.
It's busy.
She said it's like, that's very late 80s. And I'm like, well, thank you. That's exactly what I was going for there.
That's a compliment. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Late 80s, early 90s. Great. That's, that's a time of which I think fondly. Bring it on. So
yeah. Exactly. There's nothing better than the 90s.
But I got the soccer patch here, 2 different teams, but I got the 2 soccer logos going on today. So
colors match.
That's the thing. Sometimes you're just like, match the colors, but I want a little bit of local flavor today with the Rapids playing in the U.S. Open Cup tonight.
Okay, there you go. Andrew Mason, a man of many sporting desires. Keith has a great question here in the chat room. Best trade, Mims, Moss, or Troutman? Oh, man. Mims might be your best receiver right now. Moss is a versatile player who at best is a number 2 corner, but I like him as a number 4 corner or as a safety. Mm-hmm. And Troutman's probably your starting tight end, but this ties into what we were talking about with Sean Payton, and competition matters. If you're Greg Dulcich, everything in the offseason has been pointing towards you getting replaced. But if you're Dulcich, you have the opportunity to change Sean Payton's mind. How? Mm-hmm. By staying healthy and performing well during the mini camps and training camp.
And staying healthy, unfortunately, is a thing that's kind of beyond his control, because if he goes out there and he pulls another hamstring, it might be curtains for him in terms of how this coaching staff's going to perceive him. That's unfortunate. Some may consider it unfair, but that's the reality of it. I'll say this to Keith's question regarding the best trade. Even though I think there's a lot to like about Moss, the player, I don't like the trade in terms of the overall value, because the thing is, you end up giving up more in terms of draft capital if you're doing the point system of it. You end up giving up more because you want that player right now, because there is the belief that this year's picks are worth more than next year's picks. So effectively, you're paying a premium for impatience, right? The Broncos last year were on the positive end of that, which is how they got the extra third-round pick this year. They made that deal with the Colts, and they got a huge positive net in terms of overall draft capital. I prefer those kinds of deals. I'm one who would prefer to play the long game. Sean Payton is one who would rather play the short game, get the player right now, and you worry about the rest later on, even though it means sacrificing overall draft capital. So in that regard, I can't like the Moss deal at this time because of the capital deficit involved with it. I would actually say the best trade is probably the Troutman trade. If you're talking about getting somebody who could be your starting tight end, who probably has the best chance of being an all-around every down tight end for the price of moving down from late 6 to late 7 in the draft, I believe it was 52, was it 52, 62 draft slots, something like that at the end of the draft, and you get a potential starting tight end. I think value-wise, that was a very good trade, even though that is a player who's in the last year of his contract.
And with the Riley Moss situation, Mace, and I'll be very, very clear, and you know this, and our fans should know it. New England people don't talk to anybody. Maybe Jeff Legwold. Leggy's been around so long.
Yeah.
But I have heard that one of the reasons the Broncos felt such urgency with Riley Moss is because the Patriots coveted him. So I haven't heard that from New England people because, again, New England people don't talk. But there was a reason why. It was the impatience, and it was also like, hey, we can't let him hang around because a team like X, maybe it's New England, maybe not, really liked him almost where the Broncos had to take him.
And that means the player had better pay off, because the thing is, you've got that urgency. You say, okay, we have to have that one player. And I think over time, when you say we have to have that one player and we're willing to make a deal that's a draft capital deficit, I think that leads to some shaky deals and some shaky moves, and you end up losing value over time. And so it's a new era. The Broncos are going to be a team that's probably going to make those kinds of deals where they say we have to have one player. My philosophy has always been, you can't suicide on one player. You've got to say, okay, well, if we can't get this guy, let's get this guy. Let's get this guy. And George Payton, I think, probably did a little bit better job of manipulating that and being patient with it than Sean Payton has. Of course, that being said, the results for George Payton's teams, even though he inherited a mess from John Elway over the years, the results for Payton's teams haven't yet been great. So I think you gotta trust Sean Payton on this. It's not a deal I would have made, but that's just one of those things where reasonable people can disagree about the philosophy. I think if I were a GM, I think Sean Payton and I would make a great many deals. If I were GM of another team, I think Sean Payton and I would make a fair amount of deals that we feel like benefit both, because he'd be going more for the now, and I'd be saying, okay, well, I'm looking at increasing my overall amount of draft capital and working from there.
Yeah, it's clear that they want Riley Moss to work out, so that will give him an advantage that other players don't have. But it is clear, and in texting with some of my buddies across the league, there's no doubt that Sean Payton his fingerprints are all over everything. And I'm okay with that, Mace, because, again, we don't know yet how it's going to work out. But I do believe in the one man, one vision, one philosophy type of path the Broncos are on, because I know this. Sean Payton has that Super Bowl winning history. Sean Payton highly motivated to be the first head coach to win a Super Bowl with two different teams. And if it doesn't work out, we know it wasn't for lack of effort or from, the Vance Joseph era was put back by VJ never getting to make a decision himself. The Vic Fangio era was put back by he didn't care about the offense. Like, you have a guy in Sean Payton, like, this is how we're going to do it, and you're going to go forward. And if it doesn't work, well, it's not because you were scattershot with your plan.
Yeah, it's his vision. And
yes,
we haven't seen all the elements of that vision just yet. Another element that's going to come into play is the quarterback position. And now, he wouldn't have taken this job if he didn't believe on some level he couldn't get it done with Russell Wilson. But, and I know this question was lobbed at us on Twitter at some point between yesterday's show and today's show. If Russell Wilson doesn't fit his vision of what he wants and the performance on the field isn't there, I don't think he'll hesitate to say, we're going to eat that $85 million of contract, move on, and start anew at the quarterback position in 2024. In effect, that's the advantage he has of having the length of contract that he has and having the ownership faith that is possessed in him. He has time to have this year be all about figuring out who's in or who's out, up to and including the quarterback position. And that's what's going to define this year, I think, at least as much as the actual wins and losses of the games.
Roport chimes in the chat room here and says, thinks the fan base need to have tempered expectations. Now, I think I would say proper expectations. I like when fans get excited. Now, not overly excited. Nobody's saying Super Bowl.
You're not saying dynasty this year? You're not saying dynasty?
Well, I said dynasty, and to be very clear, I said dynasty over the ownership group.
I know you did, but that was I don't know if you would have been saying that if they had not just traded for a quarterback.
Right.
That offseason, in all fairness. It was the combination of the things.
Yes.
So
yes.
I am completely with Roport on this. I think the expectations for this year need to be tempered. I think this is an evaluate and build culture year.
Are you in the and I'm going to play morning show radio host for you. So it's Ask Crack and Ballsack, Mayhem in the AM, traffic and weather on the 10s. Would
Who's
you
Ballsack?
rather? I'll be Ballsack. Would you rather, because we play the morning show game, right? Would you rather make a playoff run, wild card, lose in the first round, lose in the wild card round, or would you rather barely miss the playoffs in 2023? If you're saying tempered expectations, I'm going to give you a choice. Make the playoffs but lose, or barely miss the playoffs. Which would you rather?
Oh, how'd the quarterback do?
He's not the reason you got there.
I'd rather miss the playoffs.
I would too.
If you're getting there for now, here's the thing. If you're getting there for reasons other than the quarterback and you realize it and you make a prudent decision, a la the Buffalo Bills in 2017, when they got to the playoffs for the first time in 18 years, but they understood Tyrod Taylor was not the reason why they got to the playoffs. If you view it that way and you're prudent about it and you make the right decision, then I think you're good. But my fear is if you had a season like that and the quarterback wasn't the reason, you still sit there and say, well, we got to the playoffs. Let's continue down the path here. And maybe you don't make the move that you really need to make in that instance. So I would say probably in terms of clarity, it might be best to miss the playoffs if we're talking about this sort of thing. Now, that being said, if Russell Wilson is playing well and has clearly established himself as the quarterback, you say you're going to go forward with him, which you and I agree, that is the clearest path out of this. It is the cleanest path. It is the one that has the least complications, the fewest complications. If that is the case, then make the playoffs. But if Russell Wilson's in that middle ground where you're not sure whether you should bring him back or not, then probably for the long term, you're better off missing the playoffs this year and getting the Bear draft pick and having more clarity of what you're trying to do.
You just used the magic word right there because Greg's saying, like, we want the Broncos to lose. No, we don't. I will say this. I just want clarity. I want, because if you make the postseason and Russ isn't the guy, then you're going to have some people saying, well, give Russ another chance. And I want to know about Russell Wilson. At the end of the day, and I know it's not just about him, Mace, but I want to know after 2023, yes, you can keep going, or no, you got to make a change. I want to know exactly. I don't want much gray area in this. I want a clear and precise decision for this team and for the fans as well. We had to sit through the damn Drew Lock era, right? Just give Lock a chance. Part of that's, we opened the show with selfishness. Part of that's me being selfish. Like, I don't want to have to battle everyone and be like, just give Russ a chance. Like, no, either I want to know you can do it with Russ, or I want to know you got to move on. But I just want to know.
Exactly. That is probably more important than the actual result as we get into the season. Now, we'll get into the season, we'll be living in the moment, and we're going to be chronicling it and reacting to it appropriately. But sitting here right now, we can have a big picture view. And what this team needs to do is establish itself and establish a foundation on which they can be annual contenders. And that may mean not having a season that sticks you in the gray area again. The gray area is kind of the worst place that you can be. We've seen that over the course of time in the NFL. We've even seen in other sports as well. Unfortunately, in that regard, the Broncos, they're not going to be very bad. Okay, they're not going 5-12, 4-13 this year.
Right.
They're not. But you can still have the type of season where you can start rebuilding the culture, but you also realize, oh, the quarterback's not the guy here, and it's clear, and you move on. You can have that type of season, even with all the things that are going on here. And that's really, I think, what maybe you hope for as the second choice. The first choice, and let me make this clear, the first choice in terms of the outcome you want is Russell Wilson putting it back together, approaching his Seattle level, and this being a playoff team. That's what everyone should want. That is the best possible outcome for this season. But if it's not exactly that, then it is fair to say, okay, what is actually the best thing for this franchise going forward? And maybe it's not sneaking into the playoffs with Russell Wilson as not the reason why you got there, as someone who's just on the bus rather than somebody who's driving the bus and getting you there.
Look at this on a slow news day. I'm like, now I got to cut us off. We got rolling.
Yeah.
We're a little overtime.
Well,
that's fine.
We've been established as haters now, right? Because we're sitting here saying that maybe it's best the Broncos don't make the playoffs this year. And I know that it's something like, if you inside the building, I'm sure they'd probably disagree with that, and that's fine. But clarity is the key word. You hit the nail on the head. Clarity as far as what this club needs to do and having a long-term process for it. This year is a prelude to what is to come.
Yes.
And if you want it to be everything it can be, it needs to break just right.
Don't want a false positive.
Right.
Right. I don't. Hey, and they made the playoffs and lost. Like,
that's one advantage. That's one advantage of being in a very tough division and a very tough conference. You know, if anything you accomplish, if you make the playoffs and Russell Wilson's good, I think it's one of those things where, like, okay, this is legit here. You actually accomplished something. If they do something like that down in Atlanta with Desmond Ridder, that could be a false positive. And by the way, what the Falcons are doing with Desmond Ridder, maybe it'll work out, but I get some Drew Lock 2020 Broncos vibes in terms of the choice they made.
For sure. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey. It is Orange and Blue Today, presented by Sean Payton, and I'm saying be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned, and as always, would you please stay frosty,